Welcome to the Unmuted Podcast. My name is Jeff. I'm the host of the podcast where we talk about all things HR tech, talent, recruiting, AI, leadership, business, and much more. We try to drop new episodes every Thursday morning, so once a week. All of our episodes live on our website at GoScaleHR.com and our YouTube channel also. And so this is actually a really special episode. This is episode number 2 of a 3-part series with Schulich Venture Academy. And this will be the second and final one with Cherry Rose Tan, who we will bring in just a minute. But this one here, this entire series tackles leadership, basically. And the first episode, we tackled the problem, the landscape, why leadership in tech can't stay the same. So that one's published already, so please check out our feed. And this episode here is really getting into the actual model. So what Schulich Venture Academy have built, and then we can really talk about the focus on building the modern scale-up leader. And so there's a new model for that, for thriving scale-up, and so we're going to dive into that. Before we get to our guest, I just want to talk about our episode. Prior to that, I just want to say that at Schulich Venture Academy, they're a fantastic organization, and they recently sponsored the HR in Tech crawl that we ran during the Toronto Tech Week, and so they were a huge part of that. And then we will drop all of the proper links down below so you can check them out and you can talk to them. So this episode here is called The Solution, Building the Modern Scale-Up Leader. And so obviously, if you go to the World Wide Web and you type in leadership, you're going to get 10.82 million hits on different models for leadership. But we're going to give you the model that you need to be sort of looking at. And so I just want to talk about two key points here. First of all, I think it's pretty obvious that scaling companies need to have scaling leaders. And so that's kind of an obvious point. But the skills that make someone successful in a startup may not always translate into a success in a scale up. And so I think it's really important. I get into conversations often about what the differences are, between a startup and then a scale up. And there are many similarities, but there are also many differences. And so I think the skill set that makes someone thrive, startup may not always translate into a scale-up. So today we're going to dive into what the modern scale-up leader looks like and why traditional learning models haven't been able to keep pace with what tech companies need. I think these are points that we've been tackling for some time, but hopefully we can get some clarity. And so that's why I'm going to bring in our guest, Cherry Rose Tan. So Cherry Rose, thank you for coming back to your second episode.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me back. I'm super excited for this next part of the conversation.
Well, this is obviously this is where, the rubber hit the road, right? And so we get to talk a little bit about what Schulich is doing, Venture Academy is doing, your work. And so that segues into my first question. Maybe you can tell us a bit about what you do.
Yeah, 100%. So my background, my role. So background, I would say, have been in startup VC entrepreneurship space for about 20 years now. Background is very much serial tech founder, serial entrepreneur, also angel investor. And my role, especially when it comes to Schulich Venture Academy, is that I've been the co-creator and now I'm currently the executive education lead at Schulich Venture Academy. So basically what that means is that way back when we first conceptualized Schulich Venture Academy, I had co-created it, co-founded it with another amazing individual from Schulich named Chris Carter. And there was very much an origin story there that, what we wanted to do with Schulich Venture Academy is we wanted to essentially build up this that we saw in the ecosystem, which is that when it comes to scale ups, when you're going to that level and you're wanting to access very specific mentorship and knowledge and networks, so many of those things are gated. And so how can we really democratize it and package it in a way that actually makes sense for folks in the modern day where people are really busy? And I'm just gonna be very frank, I think a lot of times people want to be also told what to do and where to go rather than feeling like they're getting an overwhelming sense of information. So a lot of my role at Venture Academy now is very much in the strategic side. I work with going to a lot of ecosystem events and bringing in, let's say, new partners and new relationships.
Well, fantastic. I mean, I've always been a huge fan of yours, and I think that what you're doing with SVA and more broadly with the tech community is not easy. I mean, it's really not easy because, as you said, people are busy, and I think that we tend to get very entrenched in our preferences about how we do things, and leveling up in skill set. I'm just going to dive right into it. Okay, so the
Yeah.
first question's a bit of a heavy one, but what, let's just go for it. And so, what do you see as the essential skill set for modern leaders in scaling tech companies, regardless of function?
I would say the number one thing that actually came up for me is that when I think about the future of work, right? And this is a conversation that I think all of us folks are having right now. Regardless of whether you're a startup, scale up, corporation, etc. We're living in a world era of AI. We're living in a world right now where I think there's a lot of change happening very much on the daily from macro standpoint, economic, political, social, you name it. So I think the most important thing is, leaders needing to manage what I call sometimes the change fatigue or the change rage that is actually showing up in our organizations. I'm going to give context to this. I was telling you, Jeff, I've been doing this for 20 years. When I think about the early days, when what I saw in the ecosystem, when tech was upcoming, I feel like back in the day, a lot of us were talking about change management, right? Hey, look, there's a new technology. Let's get people to start learning about it. Let's manage the way that we're having that conversation. And I think a lot of it back then was just like, let's just continue to learn what this technology is. So it's just a lot about exposure to knowledge. Then I feel like maybe this past few years, especially in the era when COVID happened and other sort of things, AI coming in, other types of technologies, we had this era of what I call the change fatigue. And we're still seeing this right now where you have trends. Well, I don't know if I call it trend. I think it's still in the workplace, stuff like quiet quitting, where people are just, I'm just be very frank, people are overwhelmed. And this is at every level, right? From employee to manager, director, VP, all the way to the C-suite. People are dealing with burnout. And I think there's a sense as well, sometimes from, especially if you're a leader here who has a lot of direct reports, sometimes other folks are feeling like, hey, some of the organizations that maybe I'm working for, I don't know if they really care that much about me. Maybe they're asking me to do more and more things and I'm putting in more and more hours. There's this feeling of sometimes transaction. And so there's this feeling of change fatigue, right? People are exhausted being told, hey, look, there's, now we have to learn about, first it used to be ChatGPT and all these things. Now we're talking about agentic AI. I think people are really tired. So now there's change fatigue. And then I'm gonna put it out there because this is my prediction, and I feel like I'm already seeing snippets of it. I had an organization, this was a year ago, has 10,000 employees. I was talking with the CEO, and one of the things we were talking about change management, change fatigue. We were talking about the importance of as he was continuing to scale some of the stuff that he needed for his organization. And when I mentioned about change fatigue, he stopped me and said, Cherry Rose, it's not change fatigue. We're actually dealing with change rage. I had to sit with that because it's a really strong word, change rage. And what he meant by that is, he's seeing a trend now in the future of work, which I agree with because I'm seeing this even more, especially this past year, where it's not just people are tired and exhausted. If you're somebody out there who's scaling a company and you're asking more and more from your people, in some cases, if you don't already have the buy-in, if people are not seeing that you're able to maybe lead them in a way that's inspiring, leading them in a way that has a level of clarity and also managing their overwhelm, sometimes we're also getting backlash now, right? So like employees not even wanting to do the thing. So yeah, I would say that's that piece, right? Just managing the change fatigue or the change rage, depending on what you're resonating with.
I would agree with you. I think that this has been a problem for years. I mean, this isn't something that new. I think what changed is that the pace of what we're seeing in terms of change in our business community is we've never seen it before, right? So obviously, where it's like AI, I think is a huge part of that. When you have the evolution of technology that's moving so quickly that, but I think the other thing too is, and this is not a new problem, is that if you want people to develop and be open to change, then you have to create the conditions that actually work. And so if you
Mhm.
overwhelm people with day-to-day work, that's never going to happen. So you have to be very intentional about how you structure work, and so that you allow for the time so that people can think to the future. Because otherwise, like as you pointed out, burnout, overwhelm, like people have to feel like emotionally connected and wanting to do this. So if they're just barely surviving, there's no chance in hell that you're going to get this through. So I think that's where that rage thing comes in. Definitely backlash, absolutely. We're seeing it everywhere.
Mhm.
So very interesting. So I just wanted to just switch to more of learning. So why
Yeah.
have a traditional training and leadership programs fallen short in preparing leaders for a scale-up environment? So I have very strong opinions about that, but
Yeah.
this isn't about me. This is about you. So what do you say?
Yeah, and I can't wait to hear what the strong opinion is, Jeff.
Okay.
I love it. And maybe just also tie the connection, folks, why we're talking about learning and relation as well to just what we were talking about with change fatigue and also with change rage. When people are feeling like that in the organization, and this is my genuine not just belief but like experience also in the professional sense, like one of the best tools that we can do to alleviate the change fatigue and the change rage is having things like education and upskilling and being able to empower our people so they're not going through the day-to-day feeling like they have no locus of control and they're just going through the chaos. And I think, okay, so one of the things I think is missing when it comes to traditional training and leadership, very frankly, I think is having programs that are really specific to what people need in the workplace, like cutting out all that, the fluff, cutting out, you still have the theory and the frameworks, but making sure everything that they're doing inside that course, that program, that upskilling, that maybe that even that conference that they're going to, whatever their version of education is, that we make sure that the tie-in from what they're learning to what gets put in the workplace is very, very clear. And I find with a lot of these traditional programs and courses in the past, as I said, oftentimes they're giving maybe perhaps frameworks or they're giving readings, but then they're sort of leaving it to that alumni or that student to try to figure out, hey, like how do I take all that stuff that I learn and how do I actually integrate it? And often that's the part that I see, especially in the space of education and events. There's often a joke in that space where, especially for folks who are here listening, where if you're somebody out there who likes to go to conference after conference after conference and you go there, you're taking copious notes, you've taken like 10, 15 pages of notes, let me ask you, how many of those things you've taken notes on, how many of those things have you actually implemented, right? So that implementation bridge, like just make it easy. Like, hey, these are the 3 things you should implement. Hey, here's a structure that's already inside the course where you're building some of the stuff that you need for your organization. I just don't feel like that's there in traditional. And I think, really frankly, I think that's one of our strengths that we're doing differently at Schulich Venture Academy.
I think you nailed it. So it comes to actual adoption. So it's the same thing
Yeah.
with anything. Back in the day, we used to send people off on courses, right? So they would take a
Mhm.
course. It didn't matter how long it is or how short it is. And so they'd be engaged in that classroom setting, whether it be virtually or in person. They would come back and they were supposed to be invigorated and then make magic happen and walk on water. Well, what ends up happening is the old, you take your stuff, say it's paper, you shove it in your drawer, and that's it. They just go back to their work. So there's nothing that is actually holding them accountable or actually helping them take those new skills and then actually apply them. There's nothing, right? And that's the hard part. The easy part is
Mhm.
having people in the room and talking about stuff and training, but it's the actual adoption piece, and then over time, because it takes time. So that's where coaches come in.
Mhm.
Mentors come in and all these other things, group learning. So there's different types of ways to do it. And that's the only way that it's going to happen. And then again, to my earlier point, leaders have to create the conditions so that people can actually do it, so that they have the time to do it. So I think what you're doing is obviously the bite-sized stuff over time,
Mhm.
mixing in different types of things and then holding people accountable, I think is probably the best broad way that you can possibly do it. So okay, so I kind of mentioned this, a little bit, but what shifts in learning design, things like, you know, experiential learning, which I'm a huge fan of,
Hmm.
cross-functional exposure, peer-driven learning. Again, I'm a huge fan of that. Or
Yeah.
providing or proving to be the most impactful.
Yeah, that great question. One of the first things that comes up for me, going back to how can we make sure that that student or alumni or leader who's going through, let's say upskilling, how they can be empowered. I think is making sure that, let's say if you're taking some kind of program or you're designing one, that every single piece that you're learning about actually leads to an outcome that I'm just gonna be very frank, that the organization cares about. And if you happen to have a boss or employer, that also person really cares about. So I'll give you an example. At Schulich Venture, because we had long conversations about this, about what the curriculum design would be, especially back then when we were conceptualizing it. One of the things we ended up putting in that we really loved was this idea of let's bring back capstones, but capstones that really integrate with what the organization needs. So, for example, at Schulich Venture Academy, we have these like 5 very specialized tracks, and they're specialized because every single department and scale up leader based on function needs something very different. And the language in which they speak, the frameworks that they're using, the tools are very different from, venture talent to venture ops to venture finance, venture capital, and then we have venture sales. And so what we did is, in working with our program directors, and each of them are these veteran or unicorn leaders, so have gone through scale all the way to like exit. We went and we asked them, hey, if this was you, you know 15, 20 years ago, for example, and you were, this person who, you don't have a lot of time, you're limited on resources, we are asking you to invest some money because you're paying for this course. What do you think would be the number one deliverable that you would love to, like, number one thing, like a project or deliverable that you would love to bring back to your boss, or you would love to bring back to your organization to show that you're able to bring in value, right? To make you feel good as an employee, and for it to really create some tangible results. And so that's what ended up happening with the capstone. So yeah, for example, a lot of our students and alumni who've gone through the programs, each of them are doing capstones based on their particular track. So for example, something like venture finance, which is led by Lean Lee, who was the former CFO at Wealthsimple, her thing that she was so excited about is, I want to do something called the monthly business review plan, so that people who are CFAs, for example, it's not just all the numbers and the financial understanding is staying with the accountants and you're always having to ask them all the time to translate the knowledge. Like, let's have some kind of monthly almost plan or almost like dashboard of sorts, so that every different function inside the organization can actually now understand the numbers and make decisions in real time. So like the capstone piece, I think, is really important. And then the other piece, which I think we are starting to see a bit more of this trend, is that people want things to be experiential, right? So they love doing stuff live. They love being in cohorts, right? It's not just all about the instructor or the program director, but they love meeting with their peers. And as they're talking about things, a really great facilitator and teacher is really encouraging and putting in thoughtful questions. So as they're, if a big concept just kind of landed on people's laps in that session or class, that they're able to sort of debrief it and talk about it in real time. 2 things I think that are really causing a lot of impact.
Yeah, I've always said that, when you have a group of people, let's say 10 people in the room, and then you
Mhm.
add your
Yeah.
so-called teacher, right? I think the old way of sort of thinking about that is the teacher is the expert, right? And so that person knows everything. Well, that's not really true, in this context here. Here, what you're saying is you've got 10 uh, really strong leaders anyways, or they're experts in their domain. And so all of them have expertise in something, and then again, together they can really uplift everything. And the teacher is really the group leader that, as you put it, asks the really good questions that facilitates those conversations. That's where the real learning happens, but also it's very hyper personalized to them. So
Mhm.
I really like that. So I'm a huge fan of that. How does SVA's approach reflect this new model? So you kind of talked a little bit about that already, but
Yeah.
and then what makes it different from conventional leadership development?
100%. I would say the number one thing for us is that, and we've talked about this quite a bit, especially to folks who've asked us, is that we really consider Schulich Venture Academy and SVA to not just be like a program or a course, but we're really building an ecosystem. And I think that's really important. When you think about Scaleup, I tell this to my founders, there's no such thing as what I call self-made. Every single person that you see there who is the scale-up leader who becomes very successful, behind the scenes, you don't realize they have probably a whole group of advisors. They've got a whole group of strategic VCs. They probably also have a whole group of other friends who are other scale-up founders who are sharing with them knowledge and lessons, especially off the record. And so what we're doing at Schulich Venture Academy, I mean, we've had 3 cohorts so far that have gone through the program, 200 alumni. We're about to launch our 4th cohort in October, which is super, super exciting. And the previous 3 have sold out. And what I love about it, which is very much the spirit of what we do at Schulich, is that we tell folks like once you're in Schulich Venture Academy, yes, you go through this 6-week live program, 3 hours a week of these live classes with your cohort, with an amazing program director who is, 8 to 10 figure leader. But then what ends up happening afterwards is when you graduate, you are now part of an ecosystem that like meets. So for example, at Schulich Venture Academy, we are doing events with all of our alumni. We're very careful about how we curate those lists. It's like, hey, we know all of the people who've been there before. We're going to bring in other folks from our network. Let's bring in some VCs. Let's bring in some community leaders. Let's bring in some scale ups who we know who are hiring, so that they're feeling like, oh, we didn't just go through a bunch workshops and have like a bunch of frameworks and that's it. And then once again, we're left to try to implement, or we're left to try to network to get our foot in the door. No, we're feeling like, hey, we're part of something much, much bigger. And I think, yes, I'll be honest, it's a strategic factor, because that's where some of a lot of the value also lies, and part of the excitement that people get when they enroll. But I also think, at Schulich as well, we're in a position right now to also feel like we want to give back to the community. We know there's a lot of folks out there where maybe there are folks like the me of 20 years ago. You're so excited about startup and VC. You've been hustling out there. You want to get to the next level, but maybe you don't have that network. Maybe you don't have that piece of knowledge that you need. And so this is where this ecosystem piece comes in. So we care a lot about that. And of course, as well, we keep in touch with a lot of our alumni, and we really ask them like, hey, what is it that you're looking for? Hey, how can we really help you after you graduated from Schulich Venture Academy? What are some of the introductions that you need so we can sort of move those results forward? So very results based, but very much care about the people that we work with.
Yeah, that's great, because I think, one thing that I always tell people is that learning never stops, right? So, I mean, you can be around for 25 years like me. I'm older. But quite frankly, like every event that I go to, like every article that I read, every person that I speak to, it's always just another, a learning opportunity. And I love it because, things change so quickly. And for those people out there who think that they know everything and they think that they've already made it to the top, but I think that's the wrong mindset to take, because there are a lot of people working for you that have really, really deep expertise, and you need to really learn from them. I really like this kind of approach where, you focus on the continuous learning part, which we've been talking about for years, but people need to have that mindset. So I just wanted to ask you, so you kind of mentioned just a little bit about this, but how does the actual program work? Say I'm an HR leader or aspiring or whatever, and, obviously I'm biased. So venture talent, right? Let's go with the talent. So,
I love it.
So how does that work?
Yeah.
So how does the actual program work?
Yeah, 100%. So Schulich Venture Academy, everything that we do there is all scale up. So imagine scale up programs that have been designed specifically for you and your function. And what it is we run cohorts twice a year. So the next cohort, as I mentioned, is in October. And so imagine you're in the venture talent track. It's essentially like a 6-week certificate program. So you would be attending classes live for 6 weeks, where the program director, so for example, for venture talent is Jenny DeForno, who is currently Chief People Officer at Touch Bistro. and former head of talent at Omer's Ventures. So if it's that program director who's listed, so this is one of the parts that I get so excited about. It really is that program director who's teaching it. It's not like their teaching assistant. It's not something that it's really them who's teaching live. And so imagine you're in classes with Jenny and you have essentially this like private sort of like Zoom classroom that you're in with her. Each of those classrooms are capped to 25 people. So imagine when, Jenny has her cohort in the fall. So she has exactly 25 people is the cap there. And then essentially you do that for 6 weeks live, right? Learning of Jenny, being with the cohort, you're having things like breakout rooms, you're having group discussions. A lot of our program directors, which I love this about them because it's a lot of work for them to build this, but they bring in real life simulations or case studies. Oftentimes as well, there are even in-class exercises where, hey, you've got this particular framework or tool that you've just been taught, that's been given to you. Now let's take some time to do that for yourself, given the numbers and data that you have in your organization, those kind of pieces. And then the lead up, the thing that's leading up to, which is I think the big value for you to show value back to your organization, is it leads up to that capstone that I mentioned to you. You've got a project that's very specific to your function, but it's a deliverable that you would have had to build anyway in your organization at some point, right?
Yep.
Whether it's something like, so for example, I'll give a good example, like venture ops, it's one of my favorite capstones. She has something that's called putting out a fire. So her capstone is about how can you build an operational plan that spans across all the functions so that as you hit different types of crisis or challenges, you have an operational framework and playbook that your whole organization can use. So that's the stuff that gets brought in. And then after all the programs are done, then we have a in-person graduation, all the alumni meet, you get to meet all the previous alumni of the other cohorts. And then we have other events as well and community building kind of stuff to make sure to give support to folks.
That's fantastic. So I always end with this one question that I ask everybody. If our viewers can learn just one thing about what we just talked about today, so what would that one thing be?
Yeah. I would say the number one thing, I always want to leave it on an inspiring note, is that, if you're someone out there who's listening to this and you're feeling change fatigue, you're feeling the change rage, because that's where we started with in the episode. I just want you to know that there are so many resources here for you, right? So really just encouraging folks, like, take that first step, right? So if you're feeling, let's say, overwhelmed about what you need to do, the skill sets you need to learn, because now you're in a scale up, you've just raised a lot of money and you're going into a new role. There's programs like Schulich Venture Academy that are here for you. There are obviously many conferences out there in our ecosystem that are here for you. There are so many communities, so many specific communities now where different types of folks, especially based on function, who are meeting. So just give yourself a little bit of grace, allow yourself to take the first step. It doesn't have to be a big first step, but take that little step. And I think the other piece as well that I want to share, Jeff, especially for folks, because I know people are feeling stressed, is that, for example, if you're interested in something like Schulich Venture Academy and you want to talk about it with us more, I want to share something in terms of celebration. Especially this past year, just a few months ago, we received $3.3 million from the federal government to essentially scale this all across Ontario. Wow. Because our mission, we're so excited. It's from FedDev, FedDev Ontario. So giving them kudos. They have now funded us for the next essentially 4 to 5 years because they believe in this mission that we're doing, that every entrepreneur, every leader out there that's building Canada's future, scale-ups, should really get the access to resources that we need. So our programs usually are, just being very frank, they're usually $4,000 a seat. So if you want to sign up for one of the tracks, but now if you're working at an Ontario-based company, Ontario incorporated company, those seats now are $500 a seat. So that's thanks to the federal government for doing that. So we just wanted to put in that plug there. And if you're interested, we'll put our contacts in the show notes. But I just want to say, really do take the first step and know that there's so many folks who are here for you in the ecosystem.
Yeah, an amazing deal. I don't think anybody can say no to that. So we will definitely share, all of those links and so forth. I mean, congratulations on that grant. pretty
Thank
amazing.
you.
I've tried to deal with the federal government. It doesn't work out so well. But anyway, you guys are you're much further ahead. So that's great. This is episode 2 of 3 of a 3-part series with Schulich Venture Academy. The first 2 were with Cherry Rose 10, and then our third one will be with the program director of Venture Talent, which is Jenny DeForno, who is the CHRO at Touch Bistro. It's a longtime contact of mine. I've known her forever. She's awesome. So once again, this is the Unmuted Podcast. I'm Jeff, your host. Podcasts live on our website, go ScaleHR.com. We're blowing up our website, so we have a new one coming, hopefully next month, and also on our YouTube channel as well. So please drop a like, drop comment, share your thought. Want to hear from you. So Cherry Rose, thank you for being here, and we will talk soon.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.